Holy Lord, most holy Lord, you alone are worthy of my praise. O holy Lord, most holy Lord, with all of my heart I sing.
With my heart I sing,
Great are you, Lord,
great are you,
worthy of praise, holy and true. Great are you, Lord, most holy Lord. Holy Lord, most holy Lord, you alone are worthy of my praise. O holy Lord, most holy Lord, with all of my heart I sing.
With my heart I sing,
Great are you, Lord,
great are you,
worthy of praise, holy and true. Great are you, Lord, most holy Lord.
Holy Lord, most holy Lord, you alone are worthy of my praise. O holy Lord, most holy Lord, with all of my heart I sing.
With my heart I sing, great are you, Lord,
Great are you,
worthy of praise, holy and true. Great are you, Lord, most holy Lord. Great are you, Lord,
great are you,
worthy of praise, holy and true. Great are you, Lord, most holy Lord.
Good morning, Cross Timbers. I'm coming to you all again from Friday afternoon. I hope this finds you all well. It is, of course, sad that we can't meet again together this week, but as of right now, it looks like we'll be good to meet next Sunday, April 5th. Fingers crossed that doesn't change, and hopefully we can be together again soon then. But remember, the choice not to meet is the choice to love our neighbor. But hopefully next week we can be out of this pandemic and be together again soon, but be looking for updates and emails concerning that. But this morning we continue our journey together towards Easter. We continue our study of 1 Corinthians 15, 1 through 8. We have seen in our study that the core of the Christian faith, the kerygma, is the claim that Christ died, Christ was buried, and Christ has been raised. This is the most fundamental truth and message of Christianity. What Paul says is of first importance. And we saw last week that even further, even more specific is the claim of resurrection. That unless the resurrection happened, then our faith is in vain, our hope and following of Christ is worthless. If the resurrection did not happen, then our message is meaningless. We've believed in vain. And y'all should go back to sleep now. And this morning I want us to consider this. That if the resurrection is so essential, so foundational to our belief and our way of life, then this morning I wanted to pose the question to us. Can we prove Easter? If the kerygma, this core message of the Christian faith, is the claim that Christ died, Christ was buried, and Christ has been raised, can we prove this claim? Can we prove that these events happen? Can we give a defense for this proclamation? Now, as you might be getting from this question, this morning's lesson might be a bit more academic than some of you would like. Joey, you may be excited. But I think these are important questions. Can we prove Easter? And this sermon will kind of be setting up for where we'll be going for our next two sermons in this series, going towards Easter. But the question before us this morning is, can we prove Easter? Now, this idea of giving offense, defending this proclamation, defending our claim of the resurrection, is known as apologetics, from the Greek word apologia. This is where we actually get our word apology. If you ever say, I apologize, this is where that word comes from. Now, apology doesn't mean saying you're sorry as we take it today. Apology in the classical usage means to offer a defense. You wouldn't just say, I apologize and say nothing else. To give an apology means to give a defense for one's behavior or one's actions and practice. To defend what you did. Think of a court scene. So apologetics is this idea of giving a defense for the faith. The practice of defending the faith. Now, I want to say up front, while apologetics has its place, I'm not the biggest fan of apologetics. Because often in modern times, it comes down to people trying to offer and find irrefutable scientific proof for God in the Bible. And though I believe one may occasionally find evidence supporting what the Bible says, or find evidence of God, one cannot prove God. It's beyond the very nature of God to be proved by material existence. Nor should we mistake the proofs we offer or any reliance on them for faith. If you only believe what you can prove, then to some extent you have removed faith from the picture. But this morning, how far does apologetics get us? Can we prove the events of Easter? Can we prove the kerygma? Can we prove that Christ died, that Christ was buried, and most importantly, can we prove the claim that Christ has been raised? So that's what I want us to consider and look at together this morning. So to begin, first we need to know that a man named Jesus existed. And though it's difficult, we can say with almost absolute historical certainty that a man named Jesus existed. Jesus was not made up by the gospel writers, for even non-Christian historians of the 1st and 2nd centuries who would have every reason to deny Jesus existed, they write about him. They confirm that there was in fact a Jewish peasant named Jesus who lived in 1st century Israel. I just want to share a couple of these quotes with you to look at together this morning. The first of these references comes from the Jewish historian named Josephus, writing in around 93 AD. Josephus is kind of famous. He wrote a book called The Antiquities of the Jews, the histories of the Jews, from Abraham till the time of the Romans. And he has a small little tiny paragraph, one small paragraph in this massive work detailing talking about Jesus. Josephus writes, Now there was about that time Jesus, a wise man, for he was a doer of startling deeds, a teacher of such men as receive the truth with pleasure. And he gained a following both among many Jews and many of Greek origin. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men amongst us, condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at the first did not forsake him. And the tribe of Christians so named for him are not extinct to this day. So Josephus, writing near the end of the 1st century, talks about this man named Jesus. And then slightly later, we get the Roman senator and historian named Tacitus. He writes in his Annals a history of Rome around 116 AD. When writing about the great fire of Rome that happened under Emperor Nero, he mentions Jesus. He writes, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. Christus, for whom their name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. And a most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular. It's kind of funny that this Roman senator historian talks so ill about his capital city. But we see in these two sources that even non-Christian historians who would have every reason to deny the existence of Jesus grant that a man named Jesus existed. And note further that from these non-Christian references to Jesus, we can say with certainty that Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate. No one was denying the death of Jesus. Even these non-Christian sources confirm it. And even the Gospels, when you get some of the Jewish leaders wanting to discredit Jesus and the apostles, notice they can't say he wasn't killed. Everyone knew Jesus died. It was a public execution. Even the apostles, to further this, the apostles, after the crucifixion, returned to their normal jobs. Peter says, I'm going fishing. So even this confirms that Jesus did in fact die. Even his followers are certain that Jesus died. They go back to their normal jobs as if none of this thing with Jesus had happened. Everyone is certain that Jesus was crucified. This is a provable historical fact. Both Christians and non-Christians confirm it. And so far, so good. We can historically confirm that a man named Jesus existed, and he was crucified under the Roman procurator Pontius Pilate. And so that first part of our kerygma, Christ died, can be historically verified. For the second claim of the kerygma, that Christ was buried, this one's a little bit harder to prove, but for the most part, it's taken for granted. If a man dies, they're generally buried. And we also get some evidence of this from the Gospels. In the Gospel of Matthew, note that the chief priests don't deny that Jesus was buried. That Jesus was buried is taken as a fact by everyone. And along with this, everyone seems to know the location of the tomb. It seems assumed in the Gospels. Otherwise, the chief priest, if Jesus wasn't buried, the chief priest could have just said, well, no, the body's over here in this mass grave, buried with all these other criminals. No one's denying that Jesus was buried. No one's saying he was taken down while he was still alive. No one's questioning this point. Jesus died and Jesus was buried. And so again, so far so good. 2 for 2. We have non-Christian testimony that a man named Jesus existed, that he was crucified under Pontius Pilate, that he died and was buried. No one is denying these facts, not even Jesus' opponents. It was a public execution and burial. No one is refuting these points. Yet if we stop there, if we stop with these first 2 claims of the kerygma, then there is no Christianity. We saw a bit of this. We talked about this a bit last week. Who cares that a man named Jesus was killed and was buried? Everyone dies and is buried. Everybody knows that. Now, this is nothing special. If you stop with the first 2 claims of the kerygma, then Christianity isn't a thing. You merely have a radical Jewish rabbi who got himself killed by the Romans. So thus now we come to the clincher. We have to ask about that third claim of the kerygma, that he was raised from the dead. Now without this final claim, there is no Christianity, as we saw last week. And note that the non-Christian sources are silent on this point. They grant Jesus existed, they grant that he died, they grant that he was buried, but they make no mention of the resurrection. And so historically they are no help in proving this third most essential point. Now, one might be tempted to say that we have historical evidence, that we have archaeological evidence. You might want to point to the empty tomb. And yet pointing to the empty tomb is troublesome for 2 reasons. First, we don't know exactly where the tomb is today. While it's likely the tradition is right and that it's where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem marks it, this is no conclusive evidence of the resurrection. For example, if I go dig up a grave in the cemetery, just some random grave, and the body's not there, people aren't immediately going to start saying, oh, this person must be raised from the dead. They're going to say it disappeared. It was moved. The grave was mismarked. Someone stole it. The empty tomb does not a resurrection make. The empty tomb in reality proves nothing. Again, one might argue the body was stolen or the body was misplaced. And this is exactly what the chief priest attempted to do, as Matthew points out. Of course, Matthew's quick to argue, nope, the body wasn't stolen, there were soldiers guarding it. But still, the empty tomb proves nothing. To confirm this point, note that the tomb also didn't mean anything to Jesus' followers. Remember in John 20, Mary Magdalene goes to the empty tomb, and she discovers the tomb's empty. And this means nothing to her. This suggests that someone stole the body. She sees Jesus, who she doesn't recognize, thinks he's the gardener, and she asks, what did you do with the body? So please give me the body so that I may go bury it properly. And so the empty tomb meant nothing to them. It didn't prove the resurrection. Even the Peter and the beloved disciple, they run and simply look in the tomb, then go home and go back to fishing. The empty tomb does not cause the early believers to believe the resurrection. We see this in pretty much all the Gospels. The apostles, the women, they find the tomb, they see it, but the empty tomb does not make them believe. the empty tomb doesn't prove anything. Even those who discover the tomb do not take it as evidence of the resurrection. And so the empty tomb proves nothing, merely that a body was not found. So while the empty tomb can be a powerful symbol for our faith, it does not aid us in defending the most foundational claim that Christ has been raised from the dead. There's no archaeological, no tangible historical evidence of the resurrection. And so then we're left to ask the question, are we left in the dark? Should we join the Corinthians in doubting the resurrection? Now, thankfully, no. For Paul and the early Christians, there is one powerful piece of evidence, one proof for them that established the claim. Look again at our text for the series. Let's read it again. 1 Corinthians 15, let's begin in verse 3. He says, "For I delivered to you as of first importance that which I received, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, and that he has been raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he was seen by Cephas and then by the 12. Then he was seen by more than 500 brothers and sisters at one time, most of whom remain until now, though some have fallen asleep. And then he was seen by James, then by all the apostles. And last of all, as to one untimely born, he was seen by me." And so we come to this text, and though the empty tomb proves nothing, we are not left in the dark. Note that after laying out the kerygma, that core of the faith in verses 3 and 4, the rest of this early creed that Paul quotes in 5 through 7 serves as evidence of the claim that Christ has been raised. Note that Paul and the early Christians who developed this statement of faith did not point to the empty tomb. Or this creed pointed to what they believed to be the strongest piece of evidence they had. A list of witnesses. A list of witnesses. Paul and the Christians are saying that if you want proof of the resurrection of Jesus, here you go. Here's this powerful testimony of all these witnesses. Of course, now in our day, the testimony of witnesses for proof and evidence is becoming less and less valued, especially in court. In our scientific age, we have fingerprint evidence, video evidence, recordings of everything. I mean, Siri is probably listening to us right now, trying to discover if we're a cult or not. Almost every aspect of our lives are being surveyed, and we can give tangible proof of it. But in the ancient world, this was not the case. You couldn't run a fingerprint check. You couldn't go get the video security footage. You couldn't run forensics on an object. Even if you found a murder weapon in the ancient world, it didn't do you much good. You just had a weapon. And thus, witnesses were everything in the ancient world. To provide a witness to testify on your behalf was the strongest piece of evidence you could give. To have someone testify saying they saw something occur was the most powerful evidence one could give. And so while witnesses may not appear as a great piece of evidence for us, for Paul and the early Christians, by giving this list of witnesses in 5 through 7, they're offering the strongest possible evidence they can for their claim that Jesus was raised from the dead. This early creed, this early statement of faith is made up of those two parts. The first is the kerygma, that foundational claim. Christ died, Christ was buried, and Christ has been raised. And the second part is the proof of that most controversial claim of the first, the list of witnesses to a resurrected Lord. And it is this evidence, this list of witnesses, on which the early Christians and Paul staked their faith. By making this list of witnesses the second part of this creed, what the early Christians are saying is that here's our profession of faith, and here's the proof. And so let's look at this proof that Paul and these early Christians offer this morning. Now, Paul seems to give this list of witnesses in an order of appearance, seemingly in order of appearance. First, we got Cephas, a.k.a. Peter, then the 12, then 500 people at once, then James, the brother of Jesus, then all the apostles. That's a lot of witnesses. Usually you're lucky if you get one or two, but Paul says, here's over 500. Here you go. By giving more than one witness in the creed, the early Christians are countering the claim that this someone hallucinated. If it was just Peter who saw Jesus, then someone would have said, oh, Peter was just seeing things. He was hallucinating. But by giving over 500, there's no such thing as mass hallucination. The resurrection is not simply based on one guy testifying that he thought he saw something. There's a plethora of independent testimonies saying we saw this individual. And also, it's not merely one occurrence. This isn't just a bunch of people who thought they saw some guy at a distance who might have looked like Jesus. But it's numerous different occurrences. Some people saw the resurrected Jesus several times. Peter seems to have seen him at least 3 times. So this wasn't just a well-done look-alike appearance. These people saw Jesus up close. They interacted with him. And then notice especially verse 6. Now, none of the Gospels actually reference this appearance, mention this appearance to more than 500 people. It's kind of odd they don't. But this creed stands as an independent testimony to an appearance of Jesus. But by including this, what Paul is in effect countering is any possible claim that the apostles and Peter made it up. You can easily imagine someone saying that Peter and the apostles, these are Jesus' closest followers. They got together, they hid the body, they colluded and made up and invented this story of resurrection. But any attempt to make that claim is thwarted by this appearance to over 500 people. These are not Jesus' close followers. It is appearance to 500 people who independently testified to seeing the resurrected Jesus. So any claim that this is a made-up claim by the apostles is undone. And further, Paul clarifies the creed a bit here. The creed states that he appeared to this 500, and Paul is quick to clarify in the last part of 15:6. He says, hey, if you doubt the resurrection of Jesus, you don't have to take my word for it. You don't have to take the apostles' word. Most of these 500 people, they're still alive. You can go ask and question them yourselves, Corinthians. Some have passed away, some have fallen asleep, but most of them are alive. You can go talk to them. Paul is saying, don't just take my word for it. Go talk to these other witnesses. I'll give you the names. Talk to Cornelius the fish merchant, Hannah the widow, Bob the builder. They also saw Jesus. You can ask them. This is a key piece of evidence for Paul. And if Paul and the apostles had made up the story of resurrection, you wouldn't go say, look, here's people you can talk to. Unless these people actually existed. And you were confident that they would support what you were claiming. Paul is basically issuing a challenge to the Corinthians, saying, if you don't believe me, go ask these others. Are you calling all of us liars? Go ask them. So this is some strong evidence. Of course, then Paul adds to the list James, the brother of Jesus, who was a doubter while Jesus was alive, but somehow comes to believe. So seeing the resurrected Lord seems to have convinced James. Then all the apostles, this is seemingly more than just the 12. And then Paul includes himself. And Paul is saying, look, Jesus was crucified. He really did die. He was buried. But I, along with all these other people, we saw him alive after the crucifixion. We are all witnesses of the resurrected Lord. But as you know, witnesses aren't always trustworthy. And people can choose to not listen to, not believe the testimony of a witness. And so while Paul is offering some evidence of his claim, it's not conclusive, undeniable proof. They can prove historically that Jesus existed, that he died, and that he was buried. But then when we come to this most controversial claim of our faith, that God raised Jesus from the dead, on this most important of all claims, we're merely left with a list of witnesses. We cannot prove this historically. The empty tomb is no help. Plenty of people at the time denied it or failed to mention the resurrection. So the resurrection of Jesus Christ remains an enigma of history. But Paul and the early Christians staked their faith. They risked their lives, they gave their lives on this piece of evidence, this one piece of evidence, a list of witnesses to the risen Lord. The question then is not, can we prove Easter? It's not, can I say with historical certainty that Easter morning happened? To ask, can we prove Easter, is to ask the wrong question. Rather, Paul has a different question for us. When Paul quotes this creed to the Corinthians, he's asking them an implicit question. And he's asking us that same question today. Do you believe the witnesses? Do you trust the witnesses? Do you believe that Peter, Paul, James, these 500, and all the apostles, the 12, do you believe what they say? Do you believe that they saw Jesus raised from the dead? And that is the question before us this morning, is do you believe the witnesses? Now, this might sound like a cliffhanger. And now that you are watching on TV, think of this as that dramatic ending of your favorite show that you must tune in again next week, or hopefully we can do so in person. This be an extra incentive to be at church on April 5th, and where we can consider, at that point we'll be considering the testimony of some of these witnesses. But this morning, whether you're alone or with your family, I want you to reflect. Ask yourself this question. Do you believe the witnesses? What makes you believe the resurrection? What has convinced you of this claim that a man who lived 2,000 years ago was raised from the dead? In reality, this is an absurdity. People don't usually do that. But our entire faith, our entire way of life is staked on this claim. And so this morning, do you trust the witnesses? Be blessed this week, Cross Timbers. Wash your hands, and hopefully we can be together again soon. God bless.
When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. With my soul. It is well with my soul. My sin, oh, the bliss of this glorious thought. My sin, not in part, but the whole, is nailed to the cross, and I bear it no more. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord, oh my soul. It is well with my soul. With my soul. It is well with my soul. And Lord, haste the day when the face shall be sight, the clouds be rolled back as a scroll, the trump shall resound, and the Lord shall descend. Even so, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul.